afternoon. I'm Beth Keller from the Highland Park Public Library, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Grace Hayek at Glencoe Public Library. We'd like to welcome you to our program this afternoon, Gardens of the North Shore of Chicago. Today's special program is presented by a partnership with Glencoe Public Library and Highland Park Public Library. We're very excited to host avid gardener and preservationist Benjamin Lenhart to take us all on a virtual tour of private gardens along the North Shore, which is based on his book, Gardens of the North Shore of Chicago. The book features 25 private gardens along the North Shore, interviews with owners, and beautiful photos by noted landscape photographer Scott Shigley, some of which you will see today. The Bookstall, an independent bookstore in Winnetka, is supporting this event with online sales of the book. A link to purchase Gardens of the North Shore can be found in the chat box on your screen. Proceeds from the sale of the book go to the Garden Conservancy, an organization that works to preserve, share, and celebrate America's gardens and diverse gardening traditions for the education and inspiration of the public. Following today's presentation, there'll be a question and answer session. You can submit your questions by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and typing in your questions. Please note that as an attendee today, your microphone and camera are turned off. Closed captioning has been enabled. You can turn off the closed captioning by clicking on the live transcription or more icon at the bottom of your screen. Today's event is being recorded. I'll now turn it over to Grace Hayek from the Glencoe Public Library to introduce our speaker. Thanks.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Benjamin Lenhart. He began gardening in the Carolinas when he was young, and over the last 30 years, he's gardened passionately in the different climates of Winnetka and Charleston, South Carolina. Following a career in investment management, he has concentrated on gardening and historic preservation. Mr. Lenhart served for 7 years as chairman of the Garden Conservancy, where he continues as chairman emeritus. He's also a board member at the Chicago Botanic Garden, the Shedd Aquarium, and the Peggy Notebaert Nature Museum in Chicago, and in Charleston, the Drayton Hall Preservation Trust, the Preservation Society of Charleston, and the Gibbs Museum of Art. Mr. Lenhart, we're so pleased that you can be here today to share some local loveliness with our webinar participants. You can go ahead now.
Well, thank you very much, Grace and Beth, for showing and inviting me. I've got to bring up my presentation here. You just give me just 1 second. And I'd also like to thank Juan Reyes, who makes everything look perfect in doing these presentations, except for the little snafu that I had just now. But as Grace said, I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes or so talking to you about 25 very special private gardens on the North Shore, and also some highlights of the Chicago Botanic Garden. Afterwards, I look forward to answering any questions that you may have. As I said to Beth and Grace before, actually the Q&A session is my favorite part because I have an opportunity to interact with some of you. But first, I'm going to answer some questions that I've been asked since this book was released last October. First, why did I write this book? Well, there were 3 factors that influenced me. First, as you know, there are many wonderful books about gardens on the East Coast, the Southeast, the Northwest, and California. However, the Midwest seems to have been overlooked. In fact, no book about gardens on the North Shore has been published in over 100 years. So I wanted to let the world know about some exceptional gardens on the North Shore and the people who have created them. In addition, there are many different styles and sizes of gardens on the North Shore, and I wanted to show their beauty and the talents of those who created them. And thirdly, and equally important, I wanted to document these exceptional gardens for future generations. As Russell Page, the legendary English landscape designer, said once, There are few gardens that can be left alone. A few years of neglect and only the skeleton of a garden can be traced. In most cases, documenting gardens is the best way gardens can be preserved for the future. As some of you know, one of the programs of the Garden Conservancy is documenting outstanding American gardens. I am pleased to say that all of the photographs taken by Scott Shigley will be given to the Garden Conservancy for their permanent documentation collection. Another question I have been asked is, how did I select Scott as my photographer? When starting this project, I knew that it would be best if I could work with a local landscape photographer. This would allow us to photograph gardens at their prime and also to deal with the vagaries of the weather. So I spoke with Doug Hare and Craig Bergman, both prominent landscape architects in Chicago, who highly recommended Scott, who did photography for them also. Scott's a very talented photographer, as you can see, and most importantly, he's easy to work with and has become my friend. Another question that people ask is, how did you decide which gardens to include? There are many beautiful gardens on the North Shore. The common theme running through all these gardens is the interest the owners have in their creations. Some are dirt gardeners, while others are less so, but all share a passion and love for their paradises. The gardens reflect a sensitivity of place and a respect for the architecture of the house. Some gardens have showy, colorful beds, while others are light and dreamy. Some are highly structured, formal, and perfectly balanced, while others have evolved over time without a specific plan. No matter what the style, the plantings, or the size of the garden, all share excellence in design and horticulture. As Barb Carr, former president of the Chicago Botanic Garden, and whom many of you know, concludes in her foreword, Ben once told me, great gardens have souls. Gardens of the North Shore of Chicago is a collection of exceptional gardens that Ben has ensured are gardens with souls, all reflecting the visions of the people who dreamed of them and the people who made them. As I mentioned earlier, I wanted to show the diversity of gardens on the North Shore, so I have included 25 private gardens. I grouped these gardens in the book into 4 categories: classic, contemporary, country, and naturalistic, based on the predominant style of the garden. We begin with classic gardens. This photo shows one of the vibrant mixed borders in the pergola garden at Camp Rosemary as you walk towards the walled garden. Let's turn to Karen and King Harris's garden in Winnetka. Charles Stick of Charlottesville, Virginia, developed a series of garden rooms separated by yew hedges with boxwood demarcating pathways and borders. This photo, which was taken from the second floor of the house, shows a path leading from the dining terrace to the perennial garden with peacock topiaries in the distance. Also, I should say that the first slide that you saw that was announcing this event was another photo of the Harris's garden. It is the circle in front as one comes into the drive and the motor court in front of the house. The rose garden, enclosed by yew hedges, consists of boxwood edged beds containing David Austin shrub roses in Karen's favorite shades of pink, coral, and white. Garden Hybrid is my name for this classic garden in Glencoe. When the owners purchased their Georgian Revival house over 20 years ago, they asked landscape architect Scott Byron to help create a combination of the formality of a French garden with the color and looseness of an English garden. Windows and terraces offer views of two matching boxwood parterres on either side of this intervening grass carpet, which is bordered by perennial beds in shades of lavender, blue, pink, and white. On a foggy day, Scott photographed this graceful ancient hawthorn tree, which is artistically braced for support and surrounded by a circle of boxwood. The garden owners are collectors of contemporary art. On the upper pool terrace, Jean-Michel Orthanel's mirrored glass sculpture contrast with the lilac standards and the tightly clipped boxwood. Beauty without boundaries is the garden of Shirley and Pat Ryan in Winnetka and was designed by landscape architect Deborah Nevins. As a young girl living in Indiana, Shirley developed a love of tulips because each May, her parents took the family on a pilgrimage to Holland, Michigan for the annual Tulip Festival. In the tulip garden, an allée of mature honey locust trees presides over large drifts of tulips in various sizes, shapes, and colors. Terracotta pots line the allée with peony-shaped Angelique tulips. The cloister garden features climbing wisteria on the Tudor-style pergola and boxwood parterres with topiary peacocks sculpted from yews. Deborah Nevins designed this creative boxwood amphitheater with 4 white crabapple trees on the ridge. This verdant delight can be seen from both the terrace as well as from the interior swimming pool. Maureen and Scott Byron's garden was naturally designed by Scott, a landscape architect. Maureen wanted a large screen porch for family dining and entertaining. There are many wonderful views from this porch, including this bluestone terrace with a contemporary fountain. A pleached Armstrong maple allée nestled into boxwood frames provides the focal point as one enters the porch. Clanola is an historic garden in Lake Forest that has been lovingly restored and enhanced by Stephanie and John Harris. Landscape architect Charles Stick, who designed John's parents' garden that we saw earlier, worked closely with the Harrises to fulfill Stephanie's motto, doing everything right by the house and landscape. Ferruccio Vitali in 1927 designed the formal garden seen here after renovation by Stick. The garden is bounded by arts and crafts lattice paneling surrounding the descending lawn and perennial borders, and terminates with a small pool and replica of Diana de Versailles. An intricate boxwood parterre provides greenery on the large rear bluestone terrace, which opens onto a greensward and prairie beyond. Mixed borders alongside the walled garden to the right offer seasonal color. The vegetable garden, as Stephanie calls it, is actually 2 large garden rooms, a cutting garden and a vegetable garden that is surrounded by hornbeam hedges with 4 white Chippendale gate openings. The larger cutting garden, which is pictured here, has 4 large boxwood parterres with old apple trees, perennials, and white iceberg roses surrounding a wellhead. Edgecliff is another historic property and the home of Donna and Terry McKay in Winnetka. Lead containers filled with pale and deep pink geraniums, purple petunias, and coleus flank the entrance to the French manor house. Craig Bergman reimagined the landscape that was originally designed by Catherine Brewster in the early 1930s. The walled garden displays a limestone-edged fountain and lawn panel surrounded by exuberant mixed borders and overflowing antique urns. The pergola, created by Craig Bergman, was inspired by the Great Dixter Garden in England and overlooks the pool terrace with 2 tiers of perennials on either side of the water. As Donna says, when the grandchildren visit, they almost swim among the flowers. Now we turn to Peggy Crow's garden in Lake Forest. This portion of the garden was designed by Rosemary Very, whom Peggy and her late husband Jack met while attending the Chelsea Flower Show some years ago. Rosemary took up the assignment and enlisted Craig Bergman to be her man on the ground regarding plantings and installation. Here is the quadrant garden room exploding with perennials. The plane tree allée, designed by Jack, is punctuated with terracotta pots filled with boxwood globes and terminates with a sculpture by John Kearney. Halcyon Lodge, a name given to the property by the original owners in 1905, is located in Lake Forest. The parterre garden was part of the original design, but the garden owner reduced the size of each quadrant to provide for larger pathways. The formal garden seen here burst forth each spring with tulips and other bulbs, and later with perennials and annuals in the summer. Also, as you may recognize, the cover of the book is this same parterre garden, but in summer bloom. This is a photo of one of 2 matching borders in the courtyard garden. Elegance is created with white perennials and annuals, along with mock orange shrubs and large lead urns perched in lattice-backed alcoves. Camp Rosemary in Lake Forest is the creation of the garden owner with the assistance of landscape architects and designers. The parterre garden is filled with a combination of blue and lavender perennials and annuals, with white and lavender roses on the outer edges. The manicured striped bent grass lawn can be seen in the background. The pergola garden, the first garden that was created by the owner, consists of 3 mixed borders facing each other. This one has a rarely seen Bradford pear hedge as its backdrop and includes perennials and annuals, all in the garden owner's favorite colors of pink, fuchsia, lavender, and blue. The earlier photograph introducing classic gardens was the opposite mixed border in this same pergola garden. The white garden is an intimate alcove surrounded by hydrangeas, bugbane, variegated dogwood, flowering dogwood, and perennials. A tall Chinese female figure stands at the end and also at the entrance. Now we're going to move to contemporary gardens. This is a view of alliums bursting in late spring in a bed in front of the contemporary house of the Blooms in Winnetka. Andy and Amy Bloom commissioned Doug Hare to create an artistic blend of naturalistic plantings in the front of the property with contemporary design near the lake. Here we see a portion of the curving entrance drive with Lake Michigan in the distance. Drifts of Lady's Mantle, alliums, and Bethany carpet the woodland. Terraces on 3 different levels offer options for dining, entertainment, and sports activities. Descending from an upper level to the pool is a wide grass slope with adjacent triangles and rectangles of euonymus. The late John Bryan and Neville Bryan decided they wanted a guest house for their children and grandchildren, hence the summer house. The house is located near the original dairy farm complex in Lake Bluff. Peter Wertz of Belgium created a contemporary landscape in keeping with the John Vinci designed two-storied glass and stucco building with its viewing tower. Here we see 3 canals reflecting the viewing tower and the ever-changing sky. Tightly clipped asymmetrical hornbeam hedges, a trademark of Peter and his famous father Jacques, surround the east side of the house and provide dramatic linkage with the adjacent pastures. The Garden of Curves, my name for this garden located in Winnetka, was designed by landscape architect Doug Hare. The 2-story stucco pavilion was designed by architect Larry Booth. 3 giant rough-cut stone slabs surrounded by rhododendron, Rogersia, pachysandra, and ferns greet visitors. A path winds through the woodland with a carpet of lady's mantle and ornamental allium. Curved, irregular herringbone stone walls contain the swale of lawn seen in the background. The next section of the book covers country gardens. This is a photo of an extensive Mayapple grove at Crabtree Farm in early spring. When visiting Meadower Manor today, you would certainly not know that Donna LaPietra and Bill Curtis had little experience with gardening when they purchased Meadower Manor in 1990. Donna and Bill have restored and created many new gardens, including this aqua theater with its lawn platform for musical and theatrical performances surrounded by water and an evergreen backdrop. Espaliered apple trees separate the vegetable garden from the meadow, where blue camassia blooms in late spring. Bill, who grew up in Kansas, has always had a love affair with prairies. Here they have created a large mound reminiscent of an Indian mound with 3 different levels for viewing the 30-acre prairie of blazing star in full bloom in August. The back cover of the book is another photo of the prairie. Anne and Brian Belusic have been gardening together since they were first married. After moving to Winnetka, they engaged Craig Bergman to help create pocket gardens around the house. The hornbeam bower shelters a vintage statue at the entry to the motor court. Anne is a master at mixed plantings, placing peonies, roses, delphiniums, and poppies in beds as if they were flowers in a vase. Crabtree Farm, located in Lake Bluff, is an historic property and was purchased by the late John Bryan in Neville in 1984. In the rose garden, near the entrance to the house, pink and yellow hybrid tea roses fill boxwood-edged parterres, while climbing roses, Clematis jacquemini, and ferns hug the perimeter. The heart of the gardens at Crabtree Farm is Neville's cutting and vegetable garden. Bordered on one side by a line of Pleats crabapple trees, boxwood-edged beds contain colorful zinnias, snapdragons, and perennials blooming in late summer. John wanted his own garden, so he created a formal walled garden across from Neville's cutting and vegetable garden. The centerpiece is a large antique lead cistern overflowing with sedum, facing a lawn panel surrounded by perennials with hydrangeas climbing the walls. The gardens at 900 in Lake Forest combined the professional and personal lives of Craig Bergman and Paul Klu in an historic architectural complex. The West Gardens feature double mixed borders planted with daylilies, bee balm, phlox, and other perennials, with 4 large hornbeam cylinders in the distance. A snowfall of pink crabapple blossoms appears in spring. One of Craig's favorite spots is the Shade Garden, which features brightly colored coleus, chartreuse Japanese forest grass, a golden Japanese maple, and silvery blue brunera. When looking at this slide, you may say, Fredonia, Wisconsin is not on the North Shore. Why is this garden included? Well, the answer is, I visited Joe Gromacki's garden some time ago and was blown away. I wanted to find a way to include this garden in the book. I asked Elizabeth White, my editor, if I could cheat a little and say that Fredonia is just a little north of the North Shore. And she said, yes, we've done that kind of thing before. Joe, a passionate preservationist and collector, acquired the property 2 decades ago. He has created a rural farmstead featuring colonial-style gardens filled with heirloom plants. Here is a view of 18th century style falling terraces separated by grassy slopes and paths. At Kelton House Farm, like in the 18th century, the highest fall, which is closest to the house, contains the rarest plants. Lower terraces are reserved for vegetables. A boxwood parterre, vegetables, and sunflowers can be seen on the second fall, with a garden house and a peafowl house in the background. Interestingly, the peafowl house is elevated by 8 English saddle stones. Late summer brings bright perennial and annual colors surrounding some of Joe's extensive collection of antique garden ornaments. Old Mill Farm in Lake Forest is the home of Sherry and Frank Mariani. Over the years, Frank has created a number of gardens on the property. His first garden was the enclosed vegetable and cutting garden. Frank, who is an avid cook, says, I wanted my own vegetable garden so I could go out and pick whatever was needed for dinner that night. Espaliered fruit trees separate the orchard from the lawn and the prairie beyond. Frank renovated the prairie, where today more than 15 species of prairie grasses grow alongside flowering perennials such as purple coneflowers, Culver's root, and New England asters. A seemingly endless vista towards the prairie extends out beyond lush perennial borders of astilbe, coneflowers, Culver's root, and the queen of the prairie. Sarah and Jim Tinbrock live in Lake Forest on property that was once the first Crabtree farm of Grace Durand before she moved the dairy to Lake Bluff. Craig Bergman assisted the Tinbrocks with the design of the garden. Sarah says when they purchased their house, there were no crabapple trees present, even though the property was the site of the first Crabtree farm. So Sarah said, we need to have crabapple trees. Today, a cloud of white crabapple blossoms highlight the formal ivy-clad entrance in spring. The formal garden to the west of the house includes 4 quadrants of roses, delphiniums, foxgloves, lilies, catmint, and one of Sarah's favorites, peonies. Cindy and I purchased our house in Winnetka in 1980. I have since then relied on trial and error for the creation of the garden. Many times, unfortunately, it has been error. The Nantucket-style architecture and its location at the top of one of the most southern ravines on the North Shore guided all my gardening decisions. Stone steps descend through terrace borders, which are filled with perennials and annuals. The ravine garden is an inspiration from a visit Cindy and I made some years ago to Quatre Vents, the incredible garden in Canada of Garden Conservancy founder Frank Cabot. Today, giant Japanese butterbur, one of my favorite plants, mingles with Joe Pye weed, irises, variegated sweet flag, and ferns. In early June, Siberian iris and giant Japanese butterbur emerge in the moist soil of the ravine adjoining the woodland garden to the upper right. The last section of the book is focused on naturalistic gardens. Here, crabapple trees mark a meadow opening at Kathy and Don Levin's garden in Highland Park. Don, who is a devoted conservationist, 30 years ago enlisted Scott Byron to save and restore 14 acres of abandoned farmland in Northwest Highland Park. Today, there are over 2.5 miles of sandy gravel paths that meander through indigenous trees, shrubs, and flowers. Wooded walkways suddenly open up to a prairie and sky. Bordered by sweeping, soft-colored perennials and annuals, the pond is a refuge for birds and other wildlife. The late Mary Ann McLean created, with the help of Craig Bergman, an amazing garden in Meadowa. A diverse and significant Asian sculpture collection that was assembled by Barry McLean was the impetus for Mary Ann's garden. Bergman designed floating islands in a naturalized setting amid a Midwest forest with strategically placed sculptures and other antiquities. Seen here, a zigzag gravel path leads to the elevated Ming Dynasty stone temple and columns in the background. Tang Dynasty horses wander in the brilliantly colored maple and oak forest in autumn. A walled garden known to neighborhood children as the Secret Garden is the paradise of the late John Green and his wife Jean, and which they created for their family over 30 years ago. Doug Hare, recently having returned to Chicago from an internship in England with the late John Brooks, was eager to demonstrate his skills on this, his first major residential commission. Shallow steps with lady's mantle, lamb's ear, and other perennials growing out of the gravel treads in Beth Chatto fashion descend from the terrace to the lawn and the pond. Throughout the garden, whimsical bronze sculptures of animals created by Jean, a sculptress and painter, give a sense of humor and surprise to the garden. Here, a lively frog, known as the ballet dreamer, lifts a foot in delight near the pond. Jean told me John posed for this sculpture. Nicole Williams and her husband Larry Becker have in Glencoe combined a Jim Jensen-inspired meadow with a Japanesque landscape, as Larry likes to say. The garden has a collection of over 50 cultivars of Japanese maples, rare shrubs, and trees. Throughout the growing season, Larry prunes all of the maples as well as the conifers. Japanese painted ferns and Japanese maples of different colors and sizes line the path to the shade garden Torrey Gateway. A canary yellow flowered magnolia and the russet leaves of a Japanese maple are harbingers of early spring. A moon bridge and Japanese tea house are seen in the distance. Coneflowers, ornamental alliums, astilbes, hyssops, and bear's breeches create bold drifts of color in the upland meadow in full summer. The historic Rumsey Estate, which was designed by Jen Jensen in the early 20th century, is the home of Sandy and Roger Deromedi today. Surrounding the house, landscape architects Claire and Ryan Kettlecamp created picturesque style gardens in keeping with the English style manor house. Giant blue lobelia blooms in the clearing of native grasses and prairie perennials that evokes the work of Jen Jensen. The Mayflower Ravine runs through the property. Over the past century, the ravine had suffered greatly with erosion, fallen trees, and collapsed tableland. Roger wanted to restore the ravine to the natural look of the Jensen era. The restoration became an outstanding 5-year engineering project. Listen to this. More than 1 million pounds of topsoil was spread, and native plantings of more than 275 trees, 3,400 shrubs, and over 39,000 perennials were installed. Today, the natural beauty of the ravine glows in autumn. The last garden in the book is the world-class Chicago Botanic Garden in Glencoe. This garden has been an inspiration for many of the garden owners and landscape architects and designers represented in the book. This is a photograph taken 2 years ago in October of the iconic Linden Allée that is punctuated with stone spheres. John Brooks, the late English landscape designer mentioned earlier, created the Helen and Richard Thomas English walled garden. Each room of the garden represents a different tradition of England's long gardening history. Here we see the formal daisy garden. Evening Island, designed by Omi van Sweden and Associates, is 5 acres of layered masses of foliage and flowering plants, such as this haze of deep blue iris and catmint in late spring. Thank you very much. And now I would be very happy to answer questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Ben. It was just transporting. We do have some questions. I want, before we get to them though, I want to mention that we're going to do some 2 very brief polls that will pop up on the screen. The first one is to help us estimate how many people are with us today. So we'd appreciate it if you could fill in your vote there. Thank you. That should probably do it. And now we have a second poll with a fun little question that perhaps you could give us your opinion on. Okay, and I think that we'll probably be able to see the results of that. Oh, here we go. Strong showing for naturalistic, followed closely by classic. Good choices, everybody. It's hard to go wrong with any of them though, isn't it? Let's go to the questions in Q&A. First of all, I wanted to ask a question of my own. How did you manage to select 25 gardens? There must be at least twice as many that are also great. What was your selection process, please?
Well, Grace, I knew many of the gardens in the book. I knew the garden owners over the years. And so that was one group, of course, that I gravitated towards. However, some of the landscape architects in Chicago, they knew I was writing the book. And so I asked them to, did they have any gardens that they thought I should take a look at and perhaps include in the book. So I did and included some of those. But I'd say the vast majority out of the 25, I think there was probably no more than 4 that I didn't know. That doesn't mean I know every garden by a long shot. But one of the other things that I was very pleased about was that I asked 24 people, could I include their garden? And everyone said yes. I didn't have anyone who said no. Some did ask that I not use their name, which of course was no problem. But and even that is interesting. That as you can tell, there were very few of those that didn't wish for their names to be disclosed.
No, I'm sure it was tremendously encouraging for everyone who was asked. Okay, I want to mention to everyone watching that this is the time to start putting your questions into the Q&A if you'd like to ask our presenter anything. I'll start off with Francesca's question. How much work goes into maintaining gardens such as these? I'm assuming the work is daily and with many hands.
Well, it depends. It's a very good question. Camp Rosemary, which you saw, is probably the most intensively gardened. Right now, when the gardening season is at its highest, there are 12 gardeners at that garden. Now, there are 3 year-round. The other 9 are seasonal. So, for example, they have a crew of 3 people who mow the grass 3 times a week. So that's that group. Then they have others who do weeding, cultivating, trimming, snipping, deadheading, etc. So it's an incredible operation. Then there are other gardens in the book that have certainly once a week lawn or gardening maintenance, but maybe only a half a day with someone of like a gardener coming in, and with them doing things too. I mean, which can be every day. But it varies. So you can go from enormous amount of resources and people to more manageable. But in all cases, there is work going on at least once or twice a day in a week in those gardens.
And when you mentioned that some people are dirt gardeners, what do you mean by that? Is a dirt gardener the person who's holding the shovel?
Yes, a dirt gardener is a person like me. I actually get in I go in my garden and I dig and transplant and do this and that, and I get dirty. There are what are called white glove gardeners. Those are people who, from a distance, look at their garden, but don't do it. In all of these cases, as I said in the book, the people who are involved with these gardens, they vary from dirt gardeners, but I don't think we have any white glove. We had no white glove gardeners in the group.
Great, thank you. Shelley and Jim want to know, is your name affiliated with the Botanic Garden Lenhart Library?
Yes, the answer is yes. My wife and I are delighted to be able to support the garden with, I'll put a plug in for the library, with one of the most amazing rare book collections in the United States. We have over 4,400 rare books stretching back to the 15th century.
It is a wonderful library, and members are free to go in and look at these marvels whenever they want. I just want to point that out to people. Some people don't know that. Okay, Ilana asks, what are the yearly upkeep budgets? I imagine this varies quite a bit between gardens. And what were some of the installation costs of the gardens?
Well, I don't feel that, one, I don't know the answer, to be honest, of those. I can take some decent guesses, but I don't think it would be appropriate for me to say that. But I can tell you, like in the case of Camp Rosemary, it takes an inordinate amount of resources to have 12 gardeners during the season and 3 full-time, in January and February. And that doesn't even count the watering bill or the fertilization or the plants that, the annuals that have to be, they're many perennials, but they're certainly annuals. So you add it all up, it's considerable. Two more modest, versions. But in all cases, gardening, it's interesting. When Chicago, many of the houses on the North Shore were being built in the 20s and 30s and even in the teens. That's 1910 and 20 and 30. Very large houses were being built, and it is reported that up to 100 gardeners were on some of the estates in Lake Forest. But those were the days when there weren't income taxes and other things. And so the major, very successful industrialists could do it. That's something that's not today. And in fact, regrettably, for me to hear this, some people feel that having a garden is a negative when you're trying to sell your house, because people say, well, what does it take to manage that or keep that up? And it does take some resources, but it really takes mostly a passion and a love. And if you have that, you can do a hell of a lot yourself.
Another thing that struck me while you were going through these gardens is the time frame. These are not impulsive decisions. These are commitments over not just years, but I think decades to realize. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, I'll give you I'll comment on my own personal, because that's maybe easiest. When we started, when we bought our house in 1980, of course, the topography is still the same that we have today. But we had a growing family, and I didn't have that much time to go out, and I had a job and had to travel a lot. So anyway, but I did a portion nearest the house, which most people do. But as time allowed, and then, as I mentioned, as I went to visit Frank Cabot's garden in outside Quebec and saw his fabulous ravine garden. Well, I had a ravine, but my ravine consisted of mostly orange tiger lilies that had been planted in the 40s and had grown all over. And I wasn't a great fan of that. So I came back and said, I'm going to try to make a poor man's ravine garden after visiting Frank. But that was a 7-year project. It took us about 3 years to get rid of the orange tiger lilies. So you're correct. It does take time. That's another thing that anybody who wants a wonderful garden is take time. Let the good Lord help you and plant, you don't have to have instant gardens, because instant gardens eventually don't look half as good as gardens that take time and you see how they're growing and the rest. It's plus you don't have all the fun of watching that process.
Great, thank you. Lori asks, are we going to post the program? Yes, this program is being recorded and it will be on the YouTube channels of both the Glencoe and the Highland Park Libraries within a few days. So yes, you can watch it again and linger on the photos if you like. Here we have a question from someone else. Do you see a trend toward reducing lawn area and creating more pollinator and wildlife-friendly gardens and mini prairies?
Yes, is the answer. And it's occurring for some of the reasons I mentioned earlier. It's difficult to, for example, that bent grass lawn at Camp Rosemary. I only know of one other garden, and there's one here in Winnetka that has a bent grass lawn. That's a major upkeep issue. Plus, it takes a lot of fertilizers and the rest. So people are saying, why don't we, develop more meadows, more rain gardens, etc. And I think it's also more interesting. Not to say that I don't think lawns play an important role, I do, but I don't think you have to have acres and acres of lawns. I think you can have smaller lawns encircled by absolutely amazing borders, woodlands. The woodland garden is a gardeners, at least I think they do, I do, we go through love affairs, and we like certain plants and certain types of gardens for a certain period of time. Most people start off by wanting to have a perennial, an annual kind of garden. That's the first one because it's got the most color, and it's if you start from nothing, that's what you want. But then after you go, I went then to the woodland, and wow, how much I was enthralled by that. And then I went to the ravine garden. So today the ravine garden is my love. It's not that I don't like the others, but that's the one that gets my juices flowing the most. And I think that's happening with these other types of gardens that you mentioned.
Thank you. How did you and your photographer decide which seasons to photograph the gardens in? Spring, summer, fall? I didn't see any winter images, but how do you make that call? I'm sure all of these are lovely in every season.
Well, you're correct. First, I'll say we were going to do some winter shots, but when we did most of the photography in 2019. If you'll remember, that was a cold winter, but we didn't have an enormous amount of snow. And to take snow shots, you need a light dusting. You don't want 10 inches. So it was a bad winter for photographing gardens. So the only shot is at the Botanic Garden, the Japanese bridge. But the rest, it was dictated. We tried to get the gardens at their prime. And some of the gardens were more in late spring. Some were in the middle of the summer. And as you saw, some of them were in the fall. So it was really, for example, if the ravine at the Mayflower Ravine, at the Daramedes Garden, the Rumsey Estate. If you go in the summertime, it's wonderful, but it's kind of a panoply of green, different shades of green. But in the autumn, it knocks your socks off.
Thank you. We are running short on time. I'm going to ask just two more questions. Lawrence wonders, we're said to be in the midst of a drought in the north area above Chicago in particular. That's last night's deluge notwithstanding. How have these gardens done under these circumstances?
Well, all of the gardens have irrigation systems. So for the most part, they're being watered and they're getting supplemental water for the trees and the major shrubs. So they'll do okay. But I'll just tell you quickly, Bartlett Tree, whom I use, I was talking to them recently, and they said that this drought, semi-drought that we've had, that we won't see the effects of it much next year, but when we'll really see the dying back of more trees will be in the second and third years, because trees take a long time to both die and also to grow. So when people next year say, oh, well, the drought wasn't really a big problem, that might be too soon to claim that.
Right. We'll see. Thank you. And then finally, I wondered if you know of any opportunities to tour any of these gardens. I'm sure a lot of people out there are wondering, how can I get in and see it for myself?
Yes, well, the answer is the Garden Conservancy has for many years sponsored a program called Open Days. If you go to gardenconservancy.org, you can look at it. And just this past weekend, Camp Rosemary was open. Camp Rosemary will be open on September the 12th for limited amounts of people. But each year we have various garden tours, and we had Craig Bergman's and Peggy Crow's was on in the last day of July. So I am hopeful that over the next several years that more of the gardens that are in the book will be available. So you can check on, again on the Open Days portion of the gardenconservancy.org.
Thank you. Definitely. Well, thank you very much for a wonderful program. This has been just a delight. I'm sure Beth would join me in saying we appreciate you having us, letting us present to you today, and thank you everyone in the audience for joining us. Beth, do you have anything?
Yes, I wanted to, again, Grace, as you mentioned, thanking everyone for joining us, and thank you, Ben, for sharing the most beautiful photos of the beautiful gardens around here. I'll just remind everyone that Ben's book, Gardens of the North Shore of Chicago, can be purchased from the book stall using the link in the chat box, and proceeds from the book support the Garden Conservancy. And then both Glencoe and Highland Park libraries invite you to check out our other programs. We have a full schedule, and you can find more information at our websites, hplibrary.org and glencoelibrary.org. And as Grace mentioned, the program will be posted on our library's YouTube channels within the next few days. So that's it. And thank you all very much.
Oh, and also Mr. Lenhardt's book is widely available at public libraries throughout the North Shore, so you can always come and check it out. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.